Welcome to math class. We are continuing on in the Math Makes Sense 9 textbook. We're on section 3.6, which is the order of operations with rational numbers unit. So we are touching, this should be a little bit of a review from grade 8. We're looking at the order of operations, but we're looking particularly how we might have to deal with some problems such as positive and negative signs, decimals, fractions, just a slightly more complicated version. So the thing that we have to remember whenever we're doing order of operations, right, is our handy little quote, BEDMAS, or acronym technically. Okay, brackets, exponents, okay, division and multiplication. So division, multiplication, and then we have adding and subtracting. So I boxed up dividing and multiplying and then adding and subtracting because those two, within each of those brackets are inverse operations. So both dividing and multiplying use the same principle, so they can, when you get to it, you're going to do them in the order that they appear. Division is essentially the same as multiplication on the BEDMAS scale. But first we have brackets, so we always need to solve whatever's in the brackets. We have exponents, so we need to deal with exponents after we've dealt with brackets, and then we can move to our division and multiplication, and once we're finished with that, we can add and subtract. So how does that work when we have an actual question? So we have to start looking at, all right, which sections of this am I going to be doing first? So I have negative 0.8 plus 1.2 divided by negative 0.3 times 1.5. So looking at my BEDMAS, all of my brackets are already completed. There's no variables I need to deal with. There's no operations in there. They're just a number. So I also have no exponents. I don't need to worry about that quite yet. So what I do have is division and multiplication. So reading from left to right, I need to deal with them in the order that they appear. So what that means is, oops, that's not supposed to pull up. What that means is I'm going to skip right over this section here, and I'm going to start with 1.2 divided by negative 0.3, and then I'm going to do this section before I go back over here. So how do we write this in our notebooks? How should we show our work? Well, it's pretty easy. I rewrite the whole question and I just change the one step that I just did mathematically. Negative 0.8 plus, now 1.2 divided by negative 0.3 is going to give me, I believe it's 4. It's going to give me negative 4 times 1.5. So you can see now the two numbers involved in the division multiplication have been combined. That one's gone. So I've got my division gone. Next I need multiplication. So I have negative 4 times 1.5. So I rewrite the whole question. Negative 0.8 plus negative 4 times 1.5 is going to give me negative 6. Okay. So I have negative 0.8 plus negative 6 gives me a final answer of negative 6.8. So that's how those questions work. So let's take a look at another quick example here. So what we have is negative 3.2 minus 0.9 divided by 0.7 minus negative 1.2 squared. So this one's a little bit more complicated. We get to see how our order of operations starts to involve brackets and exponents. So I have square brackets and then I have small brackets. Okay. Inside my small brackets, so the way that the bracket hierarchy works is basically the most inside of the brackets. So that in this example, it would be my negative 1.2, since it's inside the square brackets, is the first one that has to be dealt with. That one's already dealt with. It's a number. I don't have anything else I need to change, so I'm going to leave it as is. But inside my square bracket here, I have 0.7 minus a negative 1.2. So I need to deal with that as my first step. Negative 3.2 minus 0.9 divided by 0.7 minus a negative 1.2 is going to give me positive 1.9 squared. Okay. looking at that. So now my bracket has been dealt with. Next thing I need to do is my exponent. So I get negative 3.2 minus 0.9 divided by, oh, I need to pull out my square button here, 0.9. It's going to give me 3.61. Okay. So my exponents are dealt with. Next thing I need to do here is I need to deal with my division statement. So I have negative 3.2 minus, now 0.9 divided by 3.61. Oops. Oops, I did my calculator wrong. 0.9 divided by 3 equals, so I get 0.25. I'm going to round up a little bit. So I have negative 3.2 minus 0.25. Oops. What do I have here? Okay, sorry, my calculator froze on me for a second there. Trying to punch it in to make sure I get my right number. So I have negative 3.2 minus 0.25. And that gives me a final answer of negative 3.45. Okay, so that's an example of how we deal with our step-by-steps. You'll notice if all I'm doing is subtracting or adding a number, I'm essentially just carrying it down until I get to the step where I have to include it. And all I'm doing is at every step of the way, I'm doing one mathematical operation. And I have to do each one of them in a specific order as laid out by BEDMAS. Okay, so let's take a look at another example here. Okay. So now we're looking at how we can use formulas to help us out. So we're looking at our first formula here, at least of this year, which is our temperature conversion. So I have a Fahrenheit temperature, negative 9.4, and I need to convert it to Celsius. This particular equation is going to help us do that. Order of operations is vitally important when it comes to writing and solving equations so that everybody's working on the same page so that when you make an equation, you're getting the same answers as everybody else. Obviously, that becomes very important if you're building bridges. So all we do in the case of a formula is we're going to exchange one of the variables for a number. So right here, that F represents Fahrenheit. Okay? Well, I know what my value is in Fahrenheit, so I'm just going to punch that number into the formula. So instead of F minus 32, I have negative 9.4 minus 32, and all of that is over top of 8. Okay. So I have to solve. Now, this is a unique twist on the BEDMAS formula. For all intents and purposes, you can almost pretend that the top part is a bracket. You're generally going to want to solve the top before you get to the bottom. Once you get to some higher level math, start looking at calculus and those kinds of things, that becomes a different story. But for now, we essentially want to deal with the top of the fraction, and then we want to deal with the whole fraction. So I have negative 9.4 minus 32. So that's going to give me, I believe it's negative 41.4 over 8. Negative 9. And my calculator's being super funky today. Might need a new battery. Okay, so negative 9.4 minus 32. Double checking. Yes, it is. Negative 44.4, which is divided by 8, gives me negative 5.175. I'm going to call that negative 5 degrees Celsius. Okay, so all we have to do, remembering the trickiest part is following the steps, but all we have to do is we are exchanging a number for a letter. Once we have our number in, then we're just following our BEDMAS steps. Okay, let's move on to our last example. So what we have here is the same type of problem, but now we've got some fractions to deal with. Okay. Dealing with fractions is going to do a couple things. It's going to make sure that A, you know your fraction rules pretty well, and it ensures that you follow BEDMAS correctly. You're going to wind up with some real funky answers. Okay. So same as before, we rewrite the whole question, but we only do one step at a time. Now the first thing we have to deal with is brackets. So what I have is negative 1/2 times negative 1/2 minus negative 2/3 divided by, and now I have to do 1/3 plus negative 3/12. So I need to get these over the same denominator. I'm going to multiply both of these by 4 in order to get over 12. So I have 4/12 plus negative 3/12, which leaves me with negative 1/12. Okay. Now, I don't have any exponents to deal with, so the next thing I have to deal with is division and multiplication. Remembering that anytime you have two numbers jammed beside each other, that means, in mathematical terms, that they're being multiplied. So the first thing I have to do on this one is negative 1 times 1 gives me 1, negative 2 times negative 2 gives me 4. So now I have 1/4 minus 2/3 divided by negative 1/12. So next up, I have to deal with my division and multiplication. So I have 1/4 minus, now I've got 2/3 divided by negative 1/12. So I'm going to multiply both of these by 4 again. So now I get 8/12 divided by negative divided by negative 1/12. So I'm going to actually call that negative 8/1. Okay. So I have 1/4 minus what is essentially negative 8. And 1/4 minus negative 8 is going to give me 8 1/4 as my final answer. Okay. Let's take a quick deviation here. What if we wanted to do the other step? So I have 1/4 minus 2/3 divided by 1/12. So what I'm going to do is my reciprocate and divide, so minus 2/3 times, oh, I must have done this wrong, 12/1. Oh, maybe I didn't. So I've got 1/4 minus 2 times 12 is 24/3, which is the same as 1/4 minus 8. Oh, sorry, this has to be negative, so this is also going to be negative. So this is minus a negative 8, still gives me 8 1/4 as my answer. So you can see there, both of our ways to use the division of fractions method is on the board. I'm sorry, that's an example of how we can use both of them, and they get the same answer no matter which way you go. All right, that's it for today. See you in class.